Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
Welcome to UFOs Above Canada, a nighttime podcast series exploring the people, the events, and the concepts that surround the Canadian UFO experience.
Welcome back to UFOs Above Canada, an ongoing nighttime series that gives equal attention to underground bases manned by reptiles and spandex as it does to faint white dots filmed with people's phones. In tonight's episode, I invited regular guest and friend of the show, Chris Rutkowski, for a talk about, well, we actually had a lot to talk about. First of all, in all my time knowing and regularly communicating with Chris, he never thought to mention the fact that the Canadian government's official process for UFO reports includes him. A strange relationship that only became public as a result of freedom of information requests by several journalists and civilian investigators. So yeah, of course Chris and I are going to get into that. But besides that, he also has a new book called Canada's UFOs Declassified to tell us about. And we need to discuss the topic of UFOs being brought up by a member of parliament during recent hearings in Ottawa. So yeah, we got a full plate, so let's just jump into it. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, Chris Rutkowski and I will discuss, among many other things, his role as the Canadian government's UFO guy. Chris A. Rutkowski. Is the middle initial A, is this new? What's this?
No, it's because I'm Canadian, eh?
That's EH. I noticed on your new book, it's A period. I've never seen, the only people who seem to have like a middle initial are like really important authors or presidential assassins.
Well, I could be one of those, but it turns out that there are actually a number of Chris Rutkowskis already on social media and who have published a lot of books, mostly in the arts field. It turns out that there's a Chris Rutkowski who's a famous musician, one is a famous artist, a painter. There is a Chris Rutkowski who is actually the producer of Buzz Lightyear, the original Buzz Lightyear show, things like that. And there's actually a Chris Rutkowski who builds titanium bicycles. So you know, there's a lot of us out there, and this is the way to distinguish me from all of them.
Okay, cool. It stood out when I saw your new book that on the cover, that the A, I've never seen that before. So now that makes sense. And I wonder if they do interviews and they're like, and there's one in Canada who's like a UFO researcher / insider. But anyway, before we get to your book, I want to start with that. When I did my last UFOs Above Canada, like UFO themed episode, I was talking a lot about you because you've been in the news for your connection to the, I guess, like the official process of investigating or reporting UFOs in Canada from our government. Somewhere along the official chain of command in investigating these reports involves contacting a civilian named Chris A. Rutkowski. I don't think we've never talked about this before. Is this something you kind of kept, closely guarded, and then somehow it became public?
Well, it's never been secret that I've been receiving cases and reports from the government, from Transport Canada, the Canadian Forces, and the RCMP over the years, and I've been, publishing some of this stuff online, posting it on Facebook and on Twitter and so forth, what was discovered was that I had actually briefed or submitted information used in a brief to the Canadian Minister of National Defence last year. I had actually been contacted by various politicians over the years, just as a matter of course. But I do remember that back in kind of like May, June, this time last year, I had received an email from Canadian Forces because they were preparing a brief for the then Minister of Defense, Harjit Sajjan, about UAP, because this was exactly the same time that the UAP task force report was released in the States, and there was some discussion, and NORAD might have something to do with it. And since Canada's partners with NORAD, the Canadian Minister of Defense should have some knowledge of this. So they needed to know the background of how it came to be that I had started receiving the reports. And I sent them a whole bunch of documents that I'd been prepared over the years. I told them about the Canadian UFO survey and sample reports, that some of which they had apparently never seen. I don't know why, but and that's the last I heard of it. And a diligent reporter, people are filing access to information requests all the time. And in Canada, there's a number of people doing that. And somebody had found the briefing slide, or rather the slides from the briefing that had been given to Harjit Sajjan. And I'm actually mentioned on one of the slides. In fact, in the unredacted version of one particular slide, there's actually my photograph. So the Minister of National Defense knows what I look like. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm sure I'm in a few other databases now. I can't imagine why. But anyways, it talked about how the Ministry of Defense, or the National Defense, had started sending me cases over the years, working after the end of the National Research Councils, finishing with the RCMP and receiving the cases. And that's how it came to be. And this also was coincidental with I'd also received a request from Larry Maguire, the member of parliament from, oddly enough, Manitoba, who had also requested a briefing on what I knew about UFOs and UAP. So I gave him a briefing as well. Unbeknownst to me, he had also been, at the same time, been given briefings by Louis Elizondo and Harold Puthoff, some of the big names in the States, also to talk about UAP. And that came to light fairly recently, where Larry Maguire, raised a question in a committee in Parliament on actually Supply and Services Canada, about because they have the jurisdiction of protection of the nuclear sites that are in Canada, Atomic Energy of Canada, and so forth. And he was concerned about drones that were being flown over some of these nuclear sites. And I'd actually provided a list of UFO cases from the Canadian UFO survey to him, some of which were included in that report that he had actually published online on his own site. And actually, there's another list of about 50 cases that have yet to be published, but I provided that to them as well. And since then, Larry's gone on to go public about his interest in UAP. And then another MP asked a question just the other day in a parliamentary committee. So it's quite interesting that it's all starting to happen all at once.
Yeah, because you've been involved in this forever. And there's always been a discussion about, what does the government know? How interested are they? Will they ever get involved? It just seems like that's really ramped up over the last year or so. Like, are you surprised to see so much government statements and kind of action happening in the UAP or UFO space at this point?
Well, I am and I'm not, because, there have been a lot of questions raised about UFOs in the House of Commons over the years. So there's, this is not unprecedented. It's interesting that there's a lot more interest in it right now, largely because I think what's happening in the States, and, we get Louis Elizondo involved and Puthoff, and they sort of are a driving force in the States, and it's bleeding over into Canada, and Larry Maguire getting briefed by them sort of adds fuel to this sort of thing. So that's certainly increasing some of the interest here in Canada. But it's true. There are some diligent reporters out there who have made notice there. I think there was a wire service story that was in the papers today, recognizing that a number of members of Parliament are interested in UAP, and they actually questioned the minister in charge of security Marco. The name's escaping me. Anyways, the minister himself,
Mm-hmm.
on the question of UAP, and they said, what is Canada doing? Is your department, because he oversees CSIS and the RCMP and so forth, and he said, well, I assume that the Canadian forces are in charge of this, and he didn't have any. He was personally not briefed himself, so we'll see what comes of that. But the minister just had no idea how to respond to a question like that in a committee that was thrown at him from left field.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier it was brought up, I think, by a senator from Manitoba as well, just last week. What was that all about? Were you involved in that in any way?
Well, actually, I was requested for if there were any recent UFO cases or UAP cases involving the RCMP that she wanted to use in her briefing, mm-hmm. or in her question raised in the committee. So I mean, it's interesting that they come to me for the information, because I'm the guy who is, coordinating the Canadian UFO survey. And
well, you're doing their job in a lot of ways.
Yes, yes, it is. There's a pretty funny letter to the editor. It was published in a Manitoba newspaper.
I have it in front of me. Want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead, read it. Yeah, it's pretty good.
The letter's titled "The Truth Is Out There," and here's what they say. Regarding UFOs are no laughing matter, says MP who wants the sightings probed, which is a May 18th article. So this letter to the editor says, regarding this article, I am prompted to reply to MP Larry Maguire's suggestion that a committee be established to bring clarity to the unidentified aerial phenomena situation. If the sightings are indeed real physical objects, it would be a waste of taxpayer money to investigate them, as judging from their attributes, whoever is flying them is far more advanced than we are, as they can move in ways that are physically impossible from our understanding of physics. It's probably best to let Chris Rutkowski continue to look into this matter for free. And that's signed Michael Dowling. I like that.
Yeah, I obviously have to get a better contract, because the free thing is really a problem. But yeah, I've been doing my public service for the Canadian public for many, many years now. And that's actually kind of how I got into it too, because back in the 1990s, when the National Research Council was getting out of the UFO business, they were looking for ways to do this, because the office of the non-meteoric sightings file, which was what the UFOs were called back then, was a line item in the budget for the Hertzberg Institute for Astrophysics, which was then becoming part of the Canada Space Agency. And they really didn't like the fact that there would be UFOs mentioned in their budget. So they were certainly looking for a way that research and collection of UFO reports could continue to be done without spending any money. And I just happened to be in Ottawa when some of this discussion was going on. And I sort of half jokingly said, well, you can always just send the reports to me because I'm interested, and I'd gladly take a look at them. And that's how it started. So it's not unprecedented that there's this aspect of funding or lack of funding came up. It's not unprecedented that politicians have raised the issue of UFOs and now UAP in Parliament. It's not unprecedented that politicians are interested, because it's something that's been going on for quite some time, and the fact that people have reached out to me within government to either confer or get information about UFOs and UAP in Canada, because we have something like 23,000 separate cases now since 1989. And one of the things I'm doing with some of my colleagues is going back into history and gathering up additional cases, earlier than 1989, to see if there are any cases that we've missed, and looking for additional cases that might be in the government file.
Wow. I guess as time passes and kind of the fads change and UFOs become kind of in and out of popularity as far as like pop culture goes, do you find yourself kind of moving from like crazy UFO guy to kind of political insider to crazy UFO guy? Like, Has it changed like that over the years?
Well, my wife still thinks of me as a crazy UFO guy, no matter what. My kids, oh, you don't want to get into that with my kids.
But what about when an MP calls you and they're looking for a statement? Is your wife? She probably thinks you're making it up.
Well, I have to tell you, it's very rare. I mean, people are saying in ufology that it's interesting that mainstream media are taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that in my I don't know 45-ish years of being involved in ufology and being public and talking to media about this, it's been very, very rare that there's been ridicule of any sort.
Mm-hmm.
I can barely think of a handful of times when that's been the case, because there is a serious aspect to it, and because I'm not going off talking about little green guys, and I'm not wearing tinfoil hats and communicating telepathically with the Zetans and things like that. I'm just talking about the facts, and you can talk about UFOs and UAP without invoking aliens whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Leave that to the speculation on where or whatever the data leads you. I'm simply talking about things that were actually reported. I emphasize this constantly when I'm giving presentations. I'm giving a presentation to a conference in Brazil next month about what Canada is doing with regard to UFOs and UAP.
Neat.
And I'm the strongest thing that we can go with is the actual reports that are made by pilots, air traffic control operators, RCMP, and so forth, and even the citizens who are making the reports legitimately, and they're not pulling the wool over people's eyes, that they're actually seeing things. These are what people are actually seeing, and you don't have to embellish any of this stuff. These are documented facts, and we actually have the documents. In fact, the government documents alone in Canada are tens of thousands of pieces of paper and cases. So we've got a lot of reports that testify that something is being experienced by Canadians. And, that by itself can't lend itself to ridicule, because these are the facts, and a lot are very good, high quality observers.
Mm-hmm. In the amount of reports and the high quality observers that you're discussing, that's a great segue into your book. You you have a whole series of books at this point that you've put together, but the one that just came, did it just come out last week?
It came out. Yes, it came out actually this week.
Okay, you got it in your hand there for the people.
In fact, I'm doing this because I literally just got this copy today, this afternoon.
I watched your unboxing.
I did an unboxing video. I know unboxing is out, but I did it anyways.
So tell us about this, because this is a bit different than what you've done before.
Yeah. What it is that the purpose of the book is to go into the what's called the NRC files, which is not just the NRC, but the files of the Canadian government agencies, including the RCAF and the RCMP and National Research Council and a few other departments, where UFOs had been reported over the years up until about 1981 or so. They actually stopped doing it in 1995. Mm-hmm. What happened with the cases at the end of each year is that the National Research Council's file on UFOs every year was transferred to Archives Canada, then called Archives Canada, now Libraries and Archives Canada. And they were available for examination by anybody to take a look in the library. And so because there had been such an interest and demand, and the topic of UFOs is so popular, they actually digitized somewhere around 9,000 separate documents from these files and made them available online. And so a number of people have downloaded all 9,000 documents, but very few people had taken the time to actually look what was in the file and really bore into some of the interesting cases, to mine these documents for some of the interesting and worthwhile cases. A fellow named Matthew Hayes, I can't remember, I think you may have interviewed him. I can't.
Yeah, remember. He's been on a few times. Yeah.
Yeah. He did his PhD thesis on this. As a matter of fact, my review of his book was just published last week. And I made the point, his book isn't a UFO book as such. It's more a book about what the Canadian government did with regard to the UFOs in dealing with the Canadian public. And it wasn't very complimentary. I mean, there's a sort of an antagonistic approach. But what I did is I took a look at the cases themselves, went through every single document, and pulled out some of the more interesting cases, because I think there's some interesting stuff in there that people should be aware of. There's cases by RCMP officers. One RCMP officer had an object fly right over his car and reported it. There are many cases of pilots. There are many cases from other really good observers. And in fact, I included cases from the United States, from Project Blue Book. There's cases of things, artifacts found on the ground. I do talk a little bit about Falcon Lake and Sheet Harbour and a few other interesting cases. But the point is that these are well documented. This comes directly from the official documentation that is available. It just has to be assembled in one place. And so I take the reader through some of the most interesting cases on record.
Oh, that's awesome. So when one reads your book, which is called Canada's UFOs Declassified?
Declassified. Because at one time, most of these were classified in one form or another. A number were classified secret. But some were just simply called classified. So, yeah.
And when one reads it, do you have it organized kind of like by event? Like I've seen, I'm just thinking of Don Ledger has a book called Maritime UFO Files, where he's kind of broken up into 3 or 4 pages per sighting. Is that kind of how you arranged it?
Yeah, I have it grouped in a number of different sections. There's one section, for example, on pilot sightings. There's one section on landing traces and marks in the ground and things like that, and very close, very close encounters, and then I have sections where I do indeed delve a little bit into what the government view of UFOs was at the time, and present the documents that were circulating among the various government departments. In fact, I think what sets this book apart is that I think we've included something like 50 or 60 documents themselves. I want readers to take a look at the documents and not just take my word for it when I describe what was seen, but these are actually the documents that really shaped how Canada viewed UFOs over the years.
And I find going back to that era and looking at reports and considering the sightings, something about that kind of time, I find it just hits differently than contemporary and more modern reports. What is the reason that, or do you have any explanation for why we don't really have these classic cases popping up in Canada now, where instead we're often still going back to cases from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I guess with the exception of the big ones in the US over the last few years?
Yeah, and one thing I've seen quite a bit on UFO Twitter and a few other social media is that Canada has been doing nothing about UFOs, and they've never been interested, and the U.S. has been the leader in this. Well, Canada actually really did some really in-depth investigation into UFO cases. Certainly Falcon Lake is one. In some ways Sheet Harbour, but there's a number of other cases where there's some pretty intense investigations that went on. So it's not fair to say that Canada didn't do anything. It's just that when it became so burdensome that the amount of investigation you need to do on a particular case was so overwhelming that eventually the people involved, some of the scientists, were not doing it full time. Some of the scientists were, doing their own work in astrophysics and engineering and so forth. And they had to deal with these letters from UFO witnesses and people demanding that they reveal everything. And the attitude was, if people knew a little bit more about misidentifications and clouds and weather and what planes look like, we wouldn't have a UFO problem. So that was the attitude they had. But at the same time, there were some really good high quality reports from observers like pilots and RCMP officers and other police that couldn't easily be explained, and that's the other thing. And in the book, I actually do provide explanations. If I call a spade, if in some cases, somebody had actually seen a balloon or a plane or something or a star, I go to great detail to explain why that's so. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I was going to talk about in terms of what's happening right now with regard to interest, and especially the recent Canadian stuff, where it was revealed that there was a briefing to the Canadian Minister of Defense, Harjit Sajjan, last year, is that in the files of the National Research Council UFO groups, there actually is another briefing that was prepared for the assistant to the Minister of Defense. At that time was Leo Cadieux, because Paul Hellyer had left it by that time. Mm-hmm. But what had been done is that they prepared a briefing that was going to go to the Minister of Defense, but was prepared for his assistant. And I reproduced the entire briefing in my book, 28 pages long. And the only thing missing are the slides, which is interesting because the only thing we have from the briefing to Harjit Sajjan is the slides. We don't actually know what the discussion ensued, but there's a 28-page briefing called the Robertson briefing. Not the Robertson committee report like people know about in the States, but the Robertson briefing in the States is very different. But the one in Canada listed 6 UFO cases which National Defense in Canada couldn't explain. And there's an overview of what was happening in the States at the time, discussions on how to investigate things, how best to present them to the public and so forth. But they actually presented in fairly great detail 6 cases that National Defense said these were the cream of the crop, the absolute best cases. These are why we should be paying more attention to what's going on with regard to UFOs. And we don't have that in the United States necessarily. We certainly don't have that from the recent briefings. We certainly don't have that from the UAP task force briefing. We don't know what cases were looked at. There's numbers thrown around 143 and 500 and all this sort of stuff, but we don't have that. But we do have this record in Canada that goes back, quite a few years. And when you actually look at these documents, you get the sense that, hey, there is something going on. And not necessarily that there's alien ships flying around Canada, but the point is that there are some interesting cases that deserved scientific attention and for the most part didn't get it. It's a very, very curious document on what was going on unbeknownst to most people.
Your book, I'm assuming, is available everywhere. It's not one of those like through a university kind of thing, right?
No, this is on Amazon and the whole thing.
Awesome.
I know, actually, I've heard from people who've already got it, so it's around.
I know you're always up to date with like modern cases and current cases. Whenever anything comes through me as far as a UFO report, I pass it along to you. Have you seen anything recently that stood out to you as interesting?
Well, nothing that necessarily stood out, but I have in my hands the most recent couple of cases here. May 19th, downtown Vancouver on Beach Avenue, if people know where Beach Avenue is. 3:44 in the morning, 5 seconds of an observation of an object that was described as a white half moon, moving very, very fast, no sounds. It was going left across the sky looking south, so going left, so going east. And then boom, it veered really fast right and disappeared. So this was sent into ufology research. And the other one I thought was very curious. This comes from Thunder Bay in Ontario on Saturday, May the 21st. So a few days after that one. It was observed for 10 minutes. This person saw 3 lights to the northwest acting independently of each other, moving up and down, 40 to 70 degrees from the horizon, then moving to southwest, then flickering out. Once one flickered out, another one would appear and travel across the sky to the same spot and flickered out with a total of 7 or 8 of them. Dark orange, no sound, Multiple people saw them, and they provided a video. And we assume most of the time that when you see orange lights flickering out and moving in the sky, you're talking about um, paper lanterns, these ceremonial lanterns, whatever. I've looked at the video. It doesn't look like that. And yet, I that's what I'm assuming they would be. 10 minutes is about the length of time that people would put these things up. Although it's funny that it would be up on May the 21st, although that is Victoria Day, so that sounds
there would be
like
celebrations.
Yeah, so possible. And if it's not for Victoria Day, people might have been out at the campgrounds. In parts of Canada, there's terrible floods going on right now. I don't know what's happening in Thunder Bay. Maybe they had a little bit better weather and could actually celebrate a little bit and have a picnic.
I saw one that was actually, I think you may have shared this, although I don't know if it originated from you. This was shared in the UFOs Above Canada discussion group on Facebook. It was a silver-shaped UAP spotted on May 21st in St. John's, Newfoundland. The witness gives I don't know how this report made it to the Facebook group, but the witness has a paragraph or two describing it. I'll read it to you and you let me know what you think of this one. So they say, I was stopped at a traffic light at Memorial Stadium / Dominion Supermarket on Kingsbridge Road, looking south, and directly in front of me I noticed a very slow-moving, bright, silver, cigar-shaped object about 1,200 to 1,500 feet up. No sound, no engines, no wings, no rotors, no windows, no markings or flashing lights, but very slowly it moved west. I thought, if this is a plane of some sort, it would stall at that low speed. I saw it go behind some tall trees and lost sight of it. A few seconds later, the stoplight turned green, and I turned right onto Circular Road, and as I get past the tree, just west of the RNC horse barn on Circular Road, there it was again, stopped, almost hovering above the Government House building. I pulled over and parked my car, took out my Sony point-and-shoot camera from my waist pouch, and got out to take some photos, videos, or audio, and it's gone. I looked everywhere in the clear sky and even walked across the road so I could scan the full sky, and nothing. And this was they mentioned as well that they reported this to NAV Canada, but haven't received a response yet. They were posting about it online, looking for other people who may have seen something similar on Saturday, May 21st, around 7 p.m. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, the only thing is that even though something's moving in the sky that you think is fairly close, it could be very far away. And if it's very far away, it could be just a matter of, just a slight turn and then it's gone because the sunlight would be catching it from a different direction or something like that. So it's possible, but I don't know. I mean, I'd like to look at the report a little bit more. It would be nice if the witness came forward and rather reporting it to NAV Canada, reported it somewhere else. Curiously, even though that I'm the guy who's supposed to be getting all these reports according to the various documents and stories, I actually haven't received anything from NAV Canada or National Defense in about a year. And yet we do know that there have been some cases that have been reported. NAV Canada, by the way, is a non-governmental organization, and you actually can't submit access to information requests to NAV Canada because they're under no obligations to do so.
Interesting.
Transport Canada, yes, and certainly National Defense, but not NAV Canada. And there's some suggestion that there's somebody within NAV Canada who actually does look at these cases, but it's true. It doesn't seem like anybody's investigating them right now.
Interesting. Yeah, and we're just talking about like the distance something is in the sky. As a layman, I would have no idea. If you pointed out something in the sky and say, how high is that? I would say, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I kind of take anything with distance like that, kind of with a grain of salt, I guess. I don't know what the best way to explain that would be to someone.
Well, in fact, we proposed a number of years ago some interesting experiments of having people at night try to tell us how far away a light was, for example, because you often say, I saw this orb and it was, only 100 feet away or a mile away or something like that. When in fact they're looking at a satellite that was 75 miles up in the, or 75 kilometers up in the sky. And just to see how people's judgment is in terms of UFOs, and then do the same thing during the day with, other types of objects. So It is very, very deceptive to try and judge distances of things that are in the sky without any reference points. There actually is something called the moon illusion that is taught in basic astronomy. When you look at the moon, full moon when it's rising in the sky, and then look at it when it's directly overhead, it turns out, people will overestimate the size of the moon. Well, this moon was the size of a basketball, or it was this big or something like that. Turns out that a Tylenol will actually cover up the moon if you hold the Tylenol at arm's length. It's actually very small in terms of subtending an arc. And yet people have this idea that the moon is very, very large. So it just goes to show that no matter whether it's in the sky or at the horizon, it doesn't subtend that much. But if it's close to the horizon, because we have reference points, it seems larger.
Mm-hmm. But I feel like a lot of these problems that a witness would have with giving and coming up with an accurate explanation or description of what they've seen is a big part of the problem why, I assume anyway, why the government has a hard time of actually investigating an individual report. Even if today I saw the most amazing thing in the sky above my house, the report that I would give them would be so full of errors because I'm just a civilian witness. As far as the time, I wouldn't know exactly. It was after supper, how high it was, what direction it was going, north or south. I'd be like, I have no idea. It was going towards my neighbor's house.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's what makes it like, I don't know how they can do a complete thorough investigation. And maybe that's why in the US, like some of the reports lately have been done by like military targeting systems that give all of this data. So the witness, like the errors or problems that a witness would have are gone because the cameras that have filmed them, for example, like that Tic Tac sighting or whatever, all the technical specifics are kind of built into the video. And I feel like in Canada, we need something like that to bring this from a bunch of people reporting things, maybe accurately, maybe not, to like, this is an issue that needs to be looked at and addressed.
Absolutely. In fact, the new office or whatever it is that's going to be looking at the UAP in the United States has stated explicitly that it's not really interested in anything other than instrumented data. That's removing the witness from the equation. And there's projects right now where they're setting up all sky cameras and detection stations and so forth, again, to get rid of all that, because witness observations are generally pretty poor. However, eyewitness observations have been historically very useful. I would argue that they're still very useful. For example, when Sputnik was launched in the 1950s, they actually relied on the average person looking in the sky for sightings of it to help them build their database of its orbit and things like that. That happened, in a number of occasions. In fact, even during the duration of the National Research Council's meteoric investigations, they relied on witness observations to find meteorites. They relied on people reporting UFOs to the RCMP so they could sort of collaborate all the reports so they could find a meteorite that may have crashed onto the ground. It actually happened in 1973. So there are ways in which witness observations, in fact, this idea of plane spotting is actually a real thing. And when secret American aviation tech, aerospace tech are launched and fly over populated areas, or even non-populated areas, they rely on witnesses or observers, good air observers, civilians, to say, yeah, I saw this unusual thing. It had a contrail like this, and it lasted for this long, and it was this color. And they use those observations for intelligence. So eyewitness observations are not useless. They're actually pretty valuable and give some additional insight into what's going on.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up with that. But for people out there who want to find your book, so you mentioned Amazon, but where's the best spot for them to buy it that would benefit the author? Is it Amazon or?
Well, certainly the Amazon is one of them, but this is actually published by August Knight Press in the UK, which is a division of White Crow Productions. And you can go to those websites, but Amazon will help me one way or another too. Don't worry about it.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing your Your experiences and your knowledge with this, Chris, always enlightening. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for joining Chris and I for our discussion tonight. But before we part, I want to give thanks. First, a big thanks to Chris Rutkowski for sharing another evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A big shout out to Monty Data for contributing the music for this episode. And of course, the most important thanks of all goes to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is, and it has always been, an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, please consider subscribing to the premium feed. Not only does it make the show possible, the premium feed will give you more of each topic than you'll find here on the free feed, as I'm adding exclusive content regularly. So for about the price of a cup of coffee, help the show and give yourself more of it at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And with that said, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Kim, Brittany, and Christina, thank you for going premium. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show but can't do it financially, you can give me a big hand by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting any like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If anyone out there has a story idea, wants to give feedback on the show, would like to contribute their own personal UFO sighting, or simply share feedback in the form of a voice memo, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
I wanted to ask you actually something quite interesting that's happening in the United States. And again, I'm approaching this just to see if this is something that's on your radar. And it's a little bit out of left field, so to speak. So if you'll just bear with me, but I think it's pertinent given
now we're doing baseball metaphors.
That's
like
right.
This is really
so just to be
great.
just to be serious for a moment. The Director of National Intelligence of the United States recently released a report concerning unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP. The report discusses the military sightings of hundreds of these objects that exhibit, as it says, unusual flight characteristics. And as I'm sure you're aware, on Tuesday, the United States Congress held its first congressional hearing on this in about 50 years. And during that U.S. congressional hearing, the U.S. military officials said that the UAP represents a national security risk, particularly with the sightings around nuclear plants. So again, I think on the face of this, certainly for me, it seems like a bit of a fringe area that's dominated by conspiracy theories. But given the United States recently has taken this very seriously, their Director of National Intelligence is talking about this, do you feel that your government should be taking this as seriously as the American government?
Ms. Dancho, I saw some of the similar reports that you're referring to, and I'm confident that our national security apparatus looks at all manner of threats to our national security. And
have you had any briefings about UAP?
Well, I think my understanding of this particular aspect or phenomenon is that it would likely fall more under the portfolio of the Department of National Defense, which is, I think, the branch that again would likely have that mandate. But I guess the point that I'm really making, Ms. Danjo, is that our national security partners look for potential threats to our national security in every dimension, and as they arise, we get briefed and we share.
But to date, you have not been briefed on this. You haven't had any discussions
on this particular phenomenon. No.
On UAPs, okay. And CSIS is in your department, is in your purview, which is, of course, Canada's national security organization that investigates suspected threats to Canada at home and abroad. Are you aware of any conversations CSIS has had with its U.S. counterpart on this?
Well, I know there's robust collaboration between our security communities, and I would not want to speak for every possible conversation that has
none
occurred
that you're
between
aware of.
At this point, no, I'm not.
The RCMP, as we know, reports, has a number of these reports that are public. They pass them to NORAD. Are you familiar with this protocol?
Again, I think, Ms. Dancho, we're moving into an area that is probably best put to the specific officials, because I don't want to speak about any conversations that they may have had with partners on it, and as well there may very well be some conversations that have been had, but I think those questions would be best put to them.
Okay, so you feel that the Department of National Defense should be the lead and that RCMP and CSIS do not play a role?
I think there's collaboration among all those departments, and I know that specifically as it relates to intelligence, there's, again, strong lines of communication. But from the reports that I've seen, I'm not looking at the papers that you're looking at. My understanding is that some
10 seconds, please.
Some of that work is being led by defense in the United States.
I would just conclude, Mr. I would just from a nonpartisan perspective, please reach out to your U.S. counterparts to stay informed. Thank you.